Welcome to Question Time. On tonight's panel, Nadhim Zahawi, the government's business and industry minister, a committed Brexiteer who previously ran an oil company and was a co-founder of the polling organisation YouGov. Labour's Shadow Secretary for Health and Social Care since 2016, one of the very few people in the Shadow Cabinet to keep the same job after Keir Starmer was elected Labour leader, Jon Ashworth. John Caudwell, billionaire, businessman and philanthropist, best known as founder of the mobile phone company Phones4U, and more recently for donating £500,000 to the Conservatives at the last election. Joining us down the line, writer and journalist Nicci Gerrard, co-author of a string of best-selling novels and winner of the Orwell Prize for her work on the care of people with dementia, and an expert on the transmission of infectious diseases, Professor of Theoretical Epidemiology at the University of Oxford, Sunetra Gupta. Good evening and welcome to my guests here in the studio and to Nicci, who joins us down the line from Suffolk, and to the virtual audience. Thank you very much for being part of this, and you are from the Oldham area. Very good to have you with us. And of course, if you want to join in the conversation at home, you can follow us in the usual way on social media at BBC Question Time. So let's get started. It's our first programme after the summer. We're keen to get going. Our first question tonight is from Niall Bowerman.
Hello. It's been reported that there are no coronavirus tests available in the top 10 hotspots in England. Is this the world-beating testing operation Boris promised?
Jon Ashworth.
Well, great question, Niall, and quite obviously, no, it is not the world-beating testing and tracing system that we were promised by the Prime Minister. Look, testing has become a complete shambles. We're in a real mess, and we always warn them. The Labour Party warned them, plenty of public health experts warned them, that unless they fix testing and put in place a system of tracing, which is where if you've been in touch with somebody who's got the virus, that you're contacted and you're asked to isolate yourselves, unless you put in place a proper effective system, the virus will get out of control. And they didn't put in place an effective system. The contact tracing element of test and trace isn't contacting enough people. So in Oldham, for example, the call centre that is doing this, which has been given to Serco, a company who didn't have any experience of doing this sort of work, only contacts around 50% of people. And what happens is, even if people are contacted and asked to isolate, that means taking 2 weeks off work potentially. Well, if you're on a 0 hours contract, or if in low pay, an unscrupulous employer, you can't always take 2 weeks off work. So by not fixing testing and not fixing this tracing element of it, you allow the infections to rise. And what we're now seeing is, I believe, the virus potentially getting out of control. And when you lose control of testing and tracing, you don't know where the virus is. You cannot track it. So if we end up having further restrictions, already serious restrictions have been announced, the rule of 6. In Oldham, you've got restrictions. If we end up having even more severe restrictions in the coming months, and a second dangerous spike in the virus, it's because of this failure to deal and get testing and tracing fixed. And ministers should have got in place the extra testing we needed now. Everyone said to them, as schools go back, as people are encouraged to go back to work, as we move into autumn when everyone has colds and sniffles and so on, that there'd be more pressure on this system, and ministers didn't increase testing to the levels that were needed. So it's not world-beating, it's a shambles. And you know, the British people have made great sacrifices throughout this. People have not seen their families, they've not gone to weddings, they've not even said goodbye to their loved one at funerals. The British people have honoured their side of the bargain. The government haven't. They were supposed to fix testing for this winter, and I'm afraid they failed.
Jon Caudwell.
Well, I think they probably have failed to give a world-class system, but I think that somewhat misses the point altogether, because first of all, I'm not a great believer in testing and tracing.
Why not?
Purely and simply because the virus takes a while to develop to form a positive test. So you're going to be getting negative tests from people who are infected. And by the time you've got a positive test from those people who are infected, they've already infected lots of other people without knowing that they've got the virus. But even that's not the central point. The central point is that this virus was deadly, really deadly in April. It was killing around about 18% of people. If you look at the percentage of deaths now, there's only 0.4% of deaths. And of course, each one of those is tragic, but it's 0.4% of deaths instead of 18%. And it's the same worldwide. It's the same in Spain. It's the same in France. What that leads you to say is not worry about test and trace. Let's worry about why has this virus lost its potency.
But how do you know it's not going to get worse again?
How
do you know there won't be more deaths again,
no, I haven't
as they're
finished
seeing
my
in
point
other
yet,
countries?
Fiona. My point is that there are 6 potential reasons why this virus is not killing people. We can list them.
Okay, briefly.
One is that young people are getting tested, and that's putting a huge amount of extra positives of asymptomatic young people who are not going to fall ill from it. The second point is that a lot of the people that were vulnerable have already died. The rest of the vulnerable people have been well shielded and well looked after by society. And then there's the possibility that that the masks that we're wearing and the distancing that we're doing is reducing viral loads. And it's not proven, but the possibility of a reduced viral load might mean a reduced illness that the body and the immune system can cope with and fight off, whereas an increased viral load...
Just to be clear, would you get rid of testing altogether right now?
No, but let me finish the point, because the most important point of all is coming up, which is, has the virus actually lost its potency? Now, what I think we should be doing, the scientists and the government should be finding out the weighting between these 6 factors, and if it's number 6, which is the virus is losing its potency, we don't really need to worry, because the deaths will be less than they were with common flu. So we need to understand that. Would I scrap testing? No, I wouldn't, because it has a place to play in this, but it is not the be-all and end-all. The be-all and end-all is understanding this virus, understanding those 6 factors, and then planning the action according to what we find.
Nicci, I saw you shaking your head at some of that.
I can't remember which bit I was shaking my head at. I mean, I guess what I'd say, first of all, in reply to the question, is that I quite often feel I'm living through Groundhog Day. This has been going on for over 6 months, and every week or so we are told that testing is just around the corner. We're told that there's this kind of superb system coming our way, but it's another few weeks and another few weeks, and it's been 6 months. What is more, the hyperbolic language that's used about testing, the £100 billion spent on a moonshot using a technique which, as far as I know, doesn't actually exist yet. It feels like a kind of flummery and a way of just grandstanding and speaking as if speaking something will make it true. And I think most of the public have ceased believing these promises. And then there is the farce of what is happening with testing, where most tests you can't get for days. So there's a great backlog. There are teachers not being able to teach. There are doctors not being able to go into hospital. There are carers being kept away from the care home. Most tests don't come, once they've been done, they don't come back in under 24 hours. People are being sent from Oxford to, Aberystwyth or Inverness. People are being sent to test centres which don't actually exist. And it feels quite like a farce to me. And it also feels that it's a farce that is just eroding trust in any kind of competence of this government. And in the meantime, people are being kept separate from each other. I mean, I work for a campaigning group that wants family members to go back into care homes, because for 6 months, families have been kept apart at great anguish and suffering and damage. And their care homes are waiting for tests, which they're being promised and not being given.
Let's hear from some of our audience. You've got your hands up. Ian.
To me, it's more to do with government contracts awarded to companies appointed without tenders, using COVID as an excuse to award them when it all started. It seemed a bit of a rush, and these companies are being paid millions, and they'd been seen not to work much before. So I just think it's going back further to that. It's the awarding of the contracts to these companies who don't seem to, coordinate everything.
Okay, Katie.
Yeah, I agree with Nicci that it is a farce. And what made me furious today was when Jacob Rees-Mogg talked about people carping about the testing system. We're not carping here in Oldham, and people on this panel who are from Oldham, which has one of the highest rates in the country. I'll tell you why we need those tests. You know, we need them for our elderly relatives who are ill because we're worrying about them. We need them for our children so that they can get back to their education. We need them for ourselves so that we can get back to our work, to our jobs, and earn a living. Jacob Rees-Mogg just made me sick today with pushing the blame back onto those of us who are vulnerable. We need those tests to be able to get on with our lives.
Nadhim, Jacob Rees-Mogg saying people should stop endlessly carping. Were you happy with those comments?
Well, let me try and address Niall's question.
Well, Niall, just quickly, because I do want you to get onto that. But given that Katie just mentioned
people
that,
are not to blame. No, of course not.
So was he wrong to say that?
So let me try and address the question, Fiona. Niall, you're right to say and to challenge on this because it is difficult and challenging. You know, when we got into this pandemic, we could only do about 2,000 tests a day. We're now doing 240,000 tests a day. But clearly, there's more demand.
You're not testing 240,000 people a day, though.
240,000 tests, antigen tests a day at the moment. We plan to increase it to 500,000 by the end of October. There's 250,000 antigen tests today. But you're right to challenge us, Niall, because we've got to do even better. Now, some things have got better with the latest data. So, for example, the average distance someone has to travel for a test has come down from 6.4 miles to 5.4 miles. But the in-person tests, where the results are then delivered within 24 hours, has also come down to 64% today with the data. So, you know, I'm not sort of sitting here trying to hide away from the challenges. We've got to do even better. And our target is to get to 500,000.
Can I just pick you up on that 240,000, Nadhim? Sorry, but the government's own figures, the latest figures, are that 81,000 people are being tested every day. That's the government's latest figures.
Well,
not 240,000, 81,000.
The figures I have here with me. And
that's the capacity. But 81,000, according to the government's latest figures, the 2nd to the 9th of September, 81,000 a day.
Well, the figures that I've got is that 240,000 is the latest figures.
Is what the average
today.
of people are being tested every day?
Well, no, this is the capacity in the system.
We know about the capacity, but in terms of people who are being tested, which is what everyone here is if you want a test, the capacity is kind of irrelevant. If you can't get a test, it doesn't matter what the capacity is.
Well, as I said, so there are some challenges. So the 90% of people can get to a testing facility within 22 miles of where they are at. But we have to do better, which is why we're increasing capacity to 500,000 by the end of October. And of course, test and trace will get even better. It's running at the moment just shy of 70%. 360,000 people have been identified and have isolated through the test and trace system. And we continue. So yesterday we emailed schools, Niall, so they can actually get a home testing kit to each school and they can go onto a dedicated portal and order those. Because schools...
One kit?
Schools, no, a kit has 10 tests.
Is that going to be
10
enough?
tests per school. Well, no, there's more going into schools as they need them. The thing with children, of course, that the vast majority actually are testing negative, which is good news. 99% of schools are back with 88% attendance. I think Nicci was talking about how we're doing with the school system. So many challenges. And I wouldn't sit here and claim that this is,
world-beating.
Absolutely going, exactly as I would hope it to go. But we are constantly improving, and some incredible people, incredible scientists, incredible people in the NHS, in our hospitals, in our labs. 4 new laboratories will come online, which will increase capacity even more. That is all happening, and it is difficult. But it's the right thing to do because
no one's denying the testing is the right thing to do. It's a question whether there's enough.
I started a data company, and when you look at the data, and I sit on the committee that looks at this data every day, we identify where the spikes are, which is why we're able to, with the local leadership, as we've just done in the North East. By the way, all the local MPs, all the Labour local MPs have been very supportive this evening, and when they announced the additional interventions we're making in the North East to try and control the virus.
I mean, I'm sure, Nadhim, I'm sure, as you will have seen, people in the North East a lot of people aren't getting tests, and people today turned up in Sunderland to a test site. In fact, there was nobody there to test them. So let's hear from our various people in the audience who are putting their hands up. Michael.
Yeah, it looks like Nadhim's struggling with today's fantasy figure there. It's difficult when we get all these numbers which don't bear any reality to what's happening. And to respond to the question, no one wanted a world-beating track and trace system. We wanted an effective one. It was Johnson himself who blurted out, it's going to be world-beating, it'll be ready next month, start of June, whenever it was. And what's happening clearly is that the announcement seems to be better rewarded than the actual workability of the whole system itself.
Tyra.
Hello. I believe over 100 schools in the Greater Manchester area have now had to close or have had to send children home in bubbles because of coronavirus positive tests. So is the government's view that herd immunity is now the best way forward, simply because we can't cope with the amount of tests that are required and we can't keep the country in lockdown forever?
Martin?
After the way that Dido Harding handled the data breach at Talk, and today saying that no one saw the demand for tests coming, isn't her credibility and the whole credibility of the testing scheme shot, and it needs a drastic rethink?
And Ben, you had your hand up.
But yeah, I was just thinking, going forward into the winter months, test and trace is a vital component for the nation's health, as well as the health services, getting them better or prepared. We don't want to play catch up, and when can we actually be expecting a fully working test and trace? Not a world-beating one, but an efficient one, like Martin and everyone else has said. We just need an efficient one. So, yeah.
Nadhim, I'll come back to you. But Sunetra, I just want to bring you in here. I mean, the original question is this a world-beating testing operation, as Boris Johnson promised? And also, we heard John talk about whether or not it's the right way to go anyway.
Yes, I think, well, it's obviously clearly not a world-beating system, but I think where I'm going to come in is exactly that point that you made, John. Is this really what we want to do? And you just said, Fiona, that nobody's arguing that this is the way forward, that we must test. Well, actually, I will argue against that. I think that we're all talking to a particular narrative, to a particular plot, which is that the virus is this nasty thing, which may have diminished in nastiness, although I don't think that's true. Because what I think is the virus was never really that nasty to begin with. And how are we going to deal with it? The only way we can deal with it is by somehow keeping it under control.
But when you say it wasn't that nasty to begin with, 45,000 deaths and counting sounds pretty nasty, I think, to lots of people.
I mean, what I'm saying is that in relation to flu or other, I mean, okay, what I mean by was it a nasty thing is it any nastier or less nasty now than it was in April? And I mean, it depends, obviously, as you say, whether we consider something that could kill 45,000 people to be nasty, and in relation to other pathogens that we have around that do kill a lot of other people. So I guess that's what I meant, is it is virulent, but it's not necessarily any more virulent than many of the other pathogens we deal with. But really what I wanted to say was that the reason why this virus was able to kill so many people at that stage was because the risk of being infected among the vulnerable people was really very high in April, and that has diminished. And you mentioned 6 factors, but there's a 7th factor, which is that many of us are now immune to this virus. So what we need to do is really rethink.
Yeah, but I wasn't, just to answer that point, I wasn't bringing the immunity in because I was talking about the ratio of deaths to cases. So that automatically discounts the immunity factor.
No, it doesn't actually, because what happens is when a population becomes immune, the risk of infection goes down. And so that what we really want to stop...
Well, that's the number of cases. I was just talking of the ratio of deaths to cases,
yes, but the risk,
not the cases
Well,
per
can I
population.
just interview for a second? Tyra was in our audience saying, is herd immunity the way to go? Is that your view, Sunetra?
I'm just saying that there is this other alternative pathway, which is to build up herd immunity without sacrificing the vulnerable people. And
I absolutely agree with that. Now, I've been making the point from day one that we should have invested the money into protecting the aged and the vulnerable and let everybody else build up herd immunity. And if you take the number of deaths that would have been incurred then, I believe that would have been way less doing it that way than what we're doing cumulatively by the corona deaths that we've got, the cancer deaths that we're going to have, the stroke deaths that we're going to have, the suicides, the mental illness and the destruction of the economy. This is not lives or the economy, this is lives or lives. I think we've handled it wrongly from the beginning. I understand why Boris has done that, because he's followed the rest of the world, and you can't really go against the rest of the world, otherwise you'd be absolutely pilloried if you got it wrong. But I do believe we've got it wrong. I do believe we've been doing the wrong thing, and I do believe we're doing the wrong thing now. And we really need to understand how deadly is this virus. And from the figures I'm seeing, the virus is not that deadly for those 6 reasons. And the government and the scientists need to understand the weighting behind those 6 reasons so that we make the appropriate
So are you saying that
decision.
you know, I mean, we've got a Professor of Theoretical Epidemiology. Are you saying you know better than Sunetra?
I didn't say that, did I?
Well, no, but just Sunetra saying she
No,
thinks
but
it is
I'm
more
not
deadly than you're saying.
No, I'm agreeing with a lot that she said,
Can I-
but, you know, you don't have to be a professor to read the statistics and understand the facts. You just need to have a degree of intellect.
Nicci, you had your hand on your head there. I wasn't quite sure whether that meant you approved or disapproved.
I'm a bit baffled by this conversation. I mean, it seems to me that clearly COVID-19 is deadly. Clearly, it's deadly for people who are vulnerable, for people who have underlying health conditions, and for people who are old, and for people who have dementia. I'm really unhappy at the idea that you somehow so shield that section of society that you almost build a wall within the society. So there are some people who are being kind of locked up in their homes, and some people who are free to go out into the world and have a nice time. It seems to me that what we have to think about is ways of dealing with the epidemic, and then ways of living alongside the epidemic. And those things can be done together. So it's true, I think, that in the name of a national emergency, lots of things have been done which I find quite scary. I was mentioning earlier, people being kept out of care homes where their relatives are, people not getting cancer treatment, lots of domestic abuse going on because people are locked up in tiny little flats. So I think we need to kind of have a proper grown-up conversation about how to best deal with a pandemic and how to live with a pandemic so that at the other end of it, there is not just the most enormous legacy of unresolved grief and guilt and damage and depression. And we're not doing either of those things at the moment.
Well, let's keep on this topic, but I want to take another question. Anna Wood.
So, not quite 2 weeks into the academic year, I'm aware that local schools in Bolton are already sending whole year groups home to quarantine for 2 weeks due to 1 or perhaps 2 cases of COVID. Surely, given the nature of COVID, this could happen again once these children return to school after the 2 weeks. And I was wondering if there's a less disruptive way to manage outbreaks in schools.
And Anna, you're a primary school teacher, aren't you?
I am, yeah.
So you've heard Nadhim talking about what he's intending to do with schools and what's been done for schools so far. Is that enough? Do you think that will resolve it as far as you're concerned?
I think that as we are at the moment, everything seems to be unsure really, because there are whole year groups going home and they've only just come back in for a week. You know, they've only had a week in and already they've been sent home for a further 2 weeks to quarantine. So it just seems like it's a disruption again after they've already had 6 months off school.
Well, it feels like a revolving door, you're saying?
Yeah, it just keeps going on and on for us, and I just think that I've already seen massive gaps in the learning of the children. You know, they've fallen behind, and they really need to be in school.
So, Sunetra, given your view of the pandemic and an alternative way of handling it, what do you say to someone like Anna?
Well, precisely. I mean, when I said the disease wasn't deadly, what I meant, of course, was precisely that it's not deadly in a very large sector of the population. So that presents us with this workable solution whereby we can stop testing them, let them get on with their lives, let them go to school and receive something that is incredibly valuable to them, which is education and training. Let people keep jobs, let them feed their children. Let's preserve all of these things. Let the arts continue or resume and continue to flourish. We can do all this, and by aggressively protecting, I think maybe shielding is not the right word, aggressively protecting those who are indeed vulnerable to this infection, which of course, I apologise, of course it can be very deadly in a certain sector of the population. The good news is we know now who is vulnerable to a very large degree. We know that. And we also know, what are the things we really know in this? We know who's vulnerable, and we know about the enormous costs of some of these measures. How can we balance these? We can balance these by using our tests to find creative solutions to protect the vulnerable, not just shield them and shut them up and box them away, but ways of protecting them by testing people who they'll be in contact with and making sure that they won't pass the virus on to them, by creating the conditions whereby they are at a low risk of contracting this virus, which has not diminished in its potency, but is now currently held at low risk. But we cannot hold it at low risk forever without paying these extreme costs. So
I absolutely agree with what you're saying, Sunetra, but I just wondered why you think that, or know that the virus is not losing its potency.
Well, because it doesn't mutate very quickly, it doesn't change much. There is no, I mean, we don't know anything for certain about this virus, but it hasn't really changed in ways that would biologically suggest that it has become less virulent. But what has happened is that levels of infection have declined considerably since April, and the way people die is when those infections leak into the vulnerable sector. Yeah. So that's what we need to stop.
And Jon Ashworth, are you persuaded at all by what you're hearing?
No, not really. I mean, I completely respect what you're saying, quite obviously, and I'm very aware of your background in this field, although there are other epidemiologists who take a slightly different view to you, of course. And you are quite right that the numbers of deaths have been coming down. That is something we should celebrate. But it is a virus that spreads with speed and severity. And we also know that there are increasing numbers of people in younger age brackets who have caught the virus. And yes, they may not have been admitted to intensive care in a hospital, but they are suffering from debilitating long-term conditions as a result of the virus. Now, obviously,
various pneumonias.
Sorry?
But that's true of many viruses.
Well, it's very true. It's not very pleasant to get it. It's not very pleasant for the people who've got it, because it's a multi-organ virus, isn't it?
That's also
and it
true
attacks
of
people.
flu.
Sorry?
That's also true of influenza.
We don't let everybody get it, and let's just, you know, I mean, that is not, if I may say so.
Why is it
I don't believe, if I may say
it?
so. If I may say so, I do not believe allowing people to be exposed to a virus that we know is deadly or creates serious long-term health problems for them is the right judgment.
Then why don't
for us
you
to make
shut
as
down for
policymakers.
flu?
Is the right judgment for us to make as policymakers. We are trying to protect people, to save lives, and to drive down infections as best we can. And the way in which we do that is by investing properly in a decent testing and tracing system. We do not have decent testing and tracing at the moment, which is why we've got hundreds of school children starting this school term in the same way they ended the last school term, at home and not in education.
John,
There's lots of panel. John,
can I just make this point? Because I think you're just on a party political broadcast. You know, you've listened to what I've said, you've listened to what an expert said, and you've dismissed it completely because you want to nail the government on test and trace.
No, I want to save lives.
And that's not fair. Because
I want to save lives, actually.
No, you don't want to save lives.
I do actually want to save lives,
No, because
John.
we're killing...
You just want to let the virus rip through the population.
No, absolutely not. We're killing people with cancer. We're killing young people with cancer to protect young people who won't die of this virus. We absolutely need to protect the aged, the infirm. I've been saying that for 6 months. We have to, whether we call it shielding or what sort of protection, we have to protect them to the nth degree and let everybody else carry on with the work, and there will be less deaths overall, I have no doubt whatsoever. But you won't even listen to what we're saying because you want to push your party political broadcast that the Conservative Party are failing miserably.
Well, they are failing on testing. You said that as well.
Yeah, I'm not disagreeing with that. But
what I don't like is the fact that
me
when I point it out, when I make the same point you
what I don't like is that you're sticking to your guns, that you don't even listen to the argument that this virus, that there's a different way of doing this virus.
I just disagree briefly, because I so want to hear from our audience. Almost all of them got their hands up. So, sorry, Sunetra, very briefly.
Point. Lives, not just lives in this country, lives around the world, globally. Lives.
Absolutely.
We need to save those lives.
Yes,
we need to make sure 160 million people don't starve to death.
Yes.
That's really important.
OK, so many have got their hands up. I'm going to go as quickly as I can around most of you. Asifa.
I'm following Anna's question because I'm a lecturer at college, and exactly what Anna said in terms of after 2 weeks isolation, we could end up in the same boat. But my issue is, how long are we going to play catch up? It's not just education, it's the NHS, and it's also the economy. Everything was just shut down. We're still not at full capacity. When will we ever get there? We'll constantly be on that wheel, playing catch up.
Peter.
Hi there. This question is more based towards Sunetra, as she's an epidemiologist and a specialist. I do kind of admire her more relaxed approach, although would she say that the sort of preconditions which have perhaps facilitated the growth and creation of this virus in terms of degradation of the environment and pollution, etc. Do you think that there's something in the future that could cause much more damage if we aren't if we aren't protecting the environment as much?
All right, I'm just going to move around the audience as quickly as I can, if you forgive me. Carol.
Yeah. I work in pharmacy, and just this week we've introduced the flu vaccination for the over 65s. It's been extremely popular. People in general are so frightened of just becoming ill and being vulnerable, not only to COVID, but to flu and their condition that it can cause, especially those vulnerable with other underlying conditions. Patients are just not getting access to the doctors and the normal services that they would normally take for granted. Although we're very lucky with the NHS, there is still a lot of loopholes where the NHS are not filling them. 6 weeks from an appointment for somebody that's feeling very stressed or depressed or has an underlying condition because of something they're already suffering from, diabetes and asthma, for example, heart conditions, they're just not being able to access normal NHS care, which as for the anxiety from if they do get the COVID virus, they feel like they're going to be lost.
OK, Tuesday.
My question is, with winter approaching, what is the government's coronavirus winter plan, and how will they facilitate the NHS to cope with winter pressures and a potential second wave?
OK, Nadhim, I'm going to come to you. I just want to hear one more. Matt.
My question was, I know there's a lot of different opinions out there, but what does the panel think of Professor Whitty's alleged comments that we need another 2-week national lockdown?
So there's lots of talk, Nadhim, that a 2-week lockdown could be coming if we don't get the infection rate down. Is that likely?
Well, we've got the rule of 6 now, which I think will make a difference, as well as the local interventions with Oldham and, of course, the North East now, and Leicester and Greater Manchester and other areas, Birmingham and Solihull in my part of the world.
I mean, it's one in 7 people, isn't it, are living under restrictions
if we all do the right thing, and this is where I think to Tyra's question about herd immunity, which, Professor, with all respect, what I'm seeing in the data is a big spike in those areas, not just amongst the 17 to 40-year-olds, which I think John was referring to, but then it's actually going further into the 50 and 55-year-olds. And we're beginning to see in other countries like Spain, the hospital admissions rise as well. So, Tyra, this idea of herd immunity is absolutely wrong. The right thing to do is to make sure that we all follow the, hands, face, space, and of course the rule of 6, which is why we've introduced it. Both the police and local government have said to us, we want simplicity and a straightforward message to bring the prevalence down. The prevalence of the virus has shot up, which is why we've had to take this action. I think if we do the right thing, then we don't need. We want to avoid another national lockdown. I'd like to think that we will not be in the national lockdown again if we continue to do the right thing. And I implore everybody, I'm sure everyone would agree here, that if we all follow the rules, hands, face, space, we'll manage to make sure that the second hump doesn't actually happen.
Let's just move off coronavirus just for a moment and take a question from Matthew Eaton. From Matt.
Thank you. How has the Tories' Brexit plan gone from being oven ready to a threat to our economic and political integrity?
John Caudwell.
Thank you for that. Well, I don't think that it was, first of all, oven ready, but...
How would you have described it?
It was partially developed. There was a long way
partially
to go
frozen.
Negotiations because, if you look at what Brussels are doing, and I call them the Brussels bully boys, they were taking £8 billion per year net off us. They were benefiting by £80 billion worth of trade benefit in trading with Britain. That's 80 billion better trade for them than we were receiving. They were then plundering our fishing waters, and all that with the £8 billion. Now, any commercial-minded businessman on the planet would say, yes, we'd love to do a free trade deal with Britain. We'd absolutely adore it, because we're going to gain 80 billion worth of trade deficit. And yet, they're bullying us and beating us up. They beat Theresa May black and blue, and they've continued trying to do it all the way through. Fortunately, Boris rose to the challenge and fought back. And this behaviour by Brussels, I find absolutely abhorrent. But of course, the reason they're doing it is because they've got no option. Because if they gave Britain an easy ride, the other European countries would see that, and potentially there'd be an exodus, possibly a mass exodus, possibly a complete collapse of the Union. And of course, that is not what Brussels wants. So they will use any means, fair or foul, to protect their situation and make it look to any country that dares to want to come out of the Union that they will be crucified in the process. And look what they've done just recently, threatened to cut off all Britain's food supplies to Northern Ireland. I mean, that's appalling.
Jon Ashworth?
I mean, it is curious, isn't it? Because Boris Johnson told us he had an oven-ready deal. He insisted on having a general election in order to get a mandate for his deal, and his deal went through Parliament, and we were lucky enough to see a parade of ministers on the television shows and in the studios telling us that Boris Johnson had got this great deal and we should all celebrate, that Boris Johnson had confounded his critics, Nadhim said, because it was such a brilliant deal. Now, 6 months down the line, we're told that it isn't such a brilliant deal, and it has to be looked at again, because they didn't understand, apparently, the implications of the deal at the time, or they're either lying to us at the time. And now what they're doing is by bringing forward these particular measures and the way in which they affect the Northern Ireland Protocol, they're actually talking about or admitting that they're prepared to break international law. That is a quite extraordinary position for the United Kingdom to be in, a country that helped create international law, who has always been a proud nation on the global stage, making the case for international law, and it's left us in this rather sorry state of even potentially the next president of the United States criticising us last night on Twitter. And I just sort of think that, why are they doing all this? Why are they doing that at this time when we're in the midst of a global pandemic? We can have disagreements about how we should respond to the pandemic, but I think we can all admit that it's a pretty big issue that needs the undivided attention of the government. Why are they doing this now when we need to be getting on with dealing with the coronavirus crisis?
Well, I think there's a lot that's been misunderstood about these negotiations from day one. You don't negotiate with your hand behind your back. We should have negotiated with Brussels from a really tough line right from the beginning, and we would have got this done, because every single factor is compelling why the EU should do this deal with Britain on fair terms. And the only non-compelling factor is the possible collapse of the EU as every country starts to think, do we really want to be part of this shambles? And it's that is causing the EU...
So why is the EU not doing that then? Is it because the UK government is just poor at negotiating then? Why is, if the EU is so keen to have this deal, why have we not got one?
I'm afraid Theresa May and the Conservative government were dreadful. I used to put my head in my hands in horror at the way we were negotiating with Brussels. You don't negotiate with bullies by cajoling them and saying, please, and can you do this? You fight bullies with the only weapon that they understand, and that's force, which is what Boris has done. And now they should be doing a deal with us. They should be saying, yes, you can have your international fisheries waters back. What did they say? They said you can have your waters back, but you'll never export another piece of fish to the whole of Europe if you do. Right.
Well,
it's disgusting.
Well, I'm sure if Michel Barnier was here, and of course, Michel, if you're watching, you're very welcome to come on the programme. I'm sure he'd deny that he is, or that they are acting as bully boys. Let's just hear a bit from our audience. Nathan.
Yeah, if I may ask, based on the government admitting that they're willing to break international law, why should they expect the rest of us to follow the laws that they set via Twitter and statutory instruments there? For instance, if I don't wear a face mask on the train, is that just a specific and limited way of breaking the law and therefore condoned by the government?
Niall?
Yeah, I just wanted to clarify why Boris was seen as fighting back against Brussels when instead he's now implementing something which would involve us breaking international law to bypass the agreement, because that doesn't seem like he's winning if he's having to fall back to something that affects us breaking that law.
Yeah, none of us here can condone.
Let me hear a bit more from the audience, John, just what I'm saying, because it's question time, so they can put their questions. Michael.
Yeah, I think it's a bit rich of John Caudwell banging the party political drum against the other John there, where he's done a great job himself about showing where his colours are. Basically here, what's quite clear is that the government's committed, it's apparent that for a no-deal Brexit, whatever it takes, and simply blaming and bullying, as John appears to be doing there, and insulting Brussels, isn't really going to work, I don't think. It's not really going smoothly at the moment, is it?
Does anyone who's got their hands up there support what the government is doing? Katie, you're taking your hands out. OK, because I know there are... OK, Katie, let's hear from you.
No, I absolutely don't support.
Oh, you don't? Hang on, because I know there are plenty of Brexiteers among you. So Ian, let's hear from you.
I think it's more of an oven-ready chicken stir-fry, this lot, because I can't see the way the economy is going at the moment. If we have a no deal, I can't see it being much worse than it is now or what's to come when the furlough ends.
Right, OK. Well, Boris Johnson's deal, I mean, the question is, from Matt, how has the Tories' Brexit deal gone from being oven-ready to a threat to our economic and political integrity? I just wanted to read something to you. This is a huge success for Boris. I pay tribute to all his hard work and congratulate him for defying the odds. This was a description of the withdrawal agreement agreed by Boris Johnson, who went to election on. Who said that?
Me.
Yes.
I know. I'm going to tell you why.
So how's it gone from a huge success to no longer a success at all?
So, Matt, look, we left the European Union with the withdrawal agreement and the Northern Irish Protocol. Now, within that, especially on the Northern Ireland Protocol, the I's weren't dotted and the T's weren't crossed, and both sides agreed that there will be a joint committee to deal with the details of that. Where we are today, we're negotiating a future arrangement between ourselves and the EU. We've deliberately, Matt, not asked for a bespoke, special, unique deal, because the moment you ask for something that's never been written down before, the lawyers have a field day and it will take forever to deliver.
Well, lots of lawyers are resigning, actually, at the moment, rather than having a field day.
Let me just finish this point, Fiona. This is an important point, right? We've deliberately asked for a deal like Canada, something that the European Union have done before, or like with Japan, right, from the European Union. Now, we're negotiating in good faith. It is not about us actually not delivering on the withdrawal agreement and the Northern Irish Protocol. It is about how we deliver on those things. We're investing in infrastructure. You've all heard this week about sanitary and phytosanitary, the point that John Caudwell was making about food. We're investing in infrastructure in Northern Ireland. The Northern Ireland Secretary is putting, well, £2 billion to get Stormont back operational, because we had to have it back operational because of our commitment to withdrawal agreement.
No, but that's off. In fairness, no, that is off the point. How has it gone from being a deal that you thought was a huge success, you went to the country with, to one that you now want to change?
I am confident that we will get a deal. We're negotiating in good faith. Monsieur Barnier is also negotiating in good faith, and I think both sides can get a deal. What the Prime Minister has said is we can't keep negotiating forever. There are still significant gaps on fishing and on what they call level playing field, i.e. state subsidy. Now, we've just announced a deal with Japan, a really historic deal, much bigger deal than we would have had with Japan if we're still part of the EU. And there, again, we have announced how we will deal with state subsidy, which should reassure our European friends as well. So I'm confident that we will get a deal on the future if both sides negotiate hard by the 15th of October, beyond which the Prime Minister is right to say that businesses around the country, and I'm the Business and Industry Minister, need certainty. So we need to make sure that if we can't get a deal on the terms of Canada, we'll go for an Australia deal, and we will support our businesses.
Which is no deal. An Australia deal means no deal.
Well, under WTO terms, Australia
which is no deal.
Trades with the European Union.
I just wondered if you wanted to answer Nathan's point about, because as we had the Northern Ireland Secretary saying not once but twice, and he should know because it's about the Northern Ireland Protocol, that this is breaking the law in a very specific and limited way. Would you, as Nathan's suggesting, sanction other law breaking in a very specific and limited way? Say about the rule of 6,
first of all, the withdrawal agreement does not, and the UK Internal Market Bill does not do that. The clauses within it.
You're saying it doesn't break the law?
No, hold on a second. The Attorney General has written to the committee, the select committee is responsible, making it very clear what the legal position is.
Okay, so just so we're, no, hang on. So just so we're clear.
Yes.
The Northern Ireland Secretary says it breaks the law. Are you saying differently?
No, I'm not saying different. I'm saying to you exactly what the Attorney General has written to the select committees and the Northern Ireland Secretary has said. What I'm saying is that no government can stand by and watch a part of its country and a community within its country, Northern Ireland, be harmed in any way.
That's not answering Nathan's question.
These clauses, Nathan, are an insurance policy. We've added to them that Parliament has to vote. Parliament is sovereign. Parliament would have to vote if the government has to invoke them to protect the peace process and the communities of Northern Ireland, because what we can't do, to John Caudwell's point, is have a situation where an extreme interpretation of the Northern Irish Protocol would actually stop us from sending food. 65% of our trade with Northern Ireland is with GB. 65%
that's actually not what Nathan was asking. But so let me just hear a bit more from you. So that's not what Nathan's question was. But that wasn't his question.
Yes,
I know you wanted to talk. That was not his question. His question was very specifically, given that the government is breaking the law in a specific limited way, is it OK for everyone else?
I'm saying, Nathan, you can't extrapolate in that way, because you can't watch a part of your country be harmed and the peace process be harmed and be a bystander.
All right,
that is the whole,
we hear
the
you.
reason
Let's
for
hear
these
from the
clauses
rest of this
are they're an
audience.
insurance policy.
Charlotte, let's hear from you.
Yeah, so the panel are talking about breaking the law. If these negotiations don't go well, it'll be the case that UK law enforcement loses access to really crucial European crime-fighting systems, and this is a real concern for everybody in the law enforcement community. I don't know what the panel think about that, but the way the negotiations are deteriorating, this is looking more and more likely, and the workarounds are really not efficient.
Zainab, you had your hand up a moment ago.
Hi. Yeah, I just wanted to follow on from Nathan's question. Is it not hypocritical that the government is advising the nation to report their neighbours for breaking the law? However, the government themselves intend to breach the rule of law.
Okay. Nicci, I'll come back to you, John. Nicci, you're smiling at that.
I am smiling at that and at the previous question about law breaking. I mean, the rule of six is quite interesting because the rule of six feels like it's clear. And then you know that people are going to pubs, going to restaurants, they're stomping around on moors dressed in breeches, shooting grouse.
Well, Nicci, let's come back to Matthew's question, though, which was about
much less clear.
Well, let's come back to Matthew's question, which is about how has the Tories' Brexit deal gone from being oven-ready to a threat to our economic and political integrity? Those are Matt's words.
My view on that is that, so I ardently wanted to remain in Europe, and I think I'll be sad until the day I die that we're leaving, but completely accepted that 52% of the country voted to leave, but 52% of the country did not vote to leave in a kind of chaotic, disastrous way that's also driving the country mad with boredom, I think. We seem to be locked into this terrifyingly pedantic conversation about minutiae, which is very important, but it makes most of us lose the will to live, I'd say.
Can I come back on that?
OK, let me just bring Sunetra in. She's not talked about. I will let you come back in. Sunetra.
What are my views?
Are you losing the will to live?
Well, I'm just thinking that here are two shambles. There's the way that this pandemic has been dealt with, and there's the way Brexit is unfolding. And in both cases, I'm worried about the economically vulnerable. I think in both cases, we need to identify. I agree. I don't want to, or I don't. In many cases, in this case, I don't have the qualifications to dwell on the niceties. What I want to see is that we identify the vulnerable and protect them. And I think that should be our fundamental goal, and that is where we should invest.
John, you're trying to come in.
Yeah, I really think the points that Nathan and Zainab made, they really are quite important. And I know, I have sympathy for you as a minister because they may be you may find them slightly, you might think they're slightly frustrating questions, but the actions of governments and the actions of ministers have consequences. And we're in the midst of a crisis. We're asking the British people to make immense sacrifices, the rule of six, in Oldham, in Leicester, now in Newcastle and Sunderland, not going into other people's houses, not seeing your family members in private gardens. I think the sacrifices, I think these restrictions are warranted. Probably disagree with colleagues here, but I agree with the government that these restrictions are necessary to try and bring infections down. I think we also need to sort out test and tracing. Sorry for being party political, but it is a shambles and needs fixing. Right? But at the same time, you're asking people to follow the law, face masks, rule of six, not going into their houses, and you're actually completely admitting that you're going to be breaking international law. So do you not appreciate that when we're in a pandemic and we're asking people to follow so many different restrictions and rules, that the very least the government should do is follow the law themselves?
Can I come back on this point to Zainab and Nathan? Zainab, Parliament will make that decision. Parliament is sovereign. Why do I say that to you? Because actually the German Parliament at times has actually taken votes that move away from international agreements within Europe because they deem it unconstitutional to their country. The Canadian Parliament has actually voted on things where they've signed international treaties, but they've moved away from it in domestic lawmaking. So the same thing will happen here in our Parliament. We're not saying this will happen. All we're doing is saying we need the safeguards. We need an insurance policy that we can't allow one part of the United Kingdom, Northern Ireland, the communities of Northern Ireland, to be harmed in any way by some extreme interpretation of the Northern Irish Protocol. We will bring it back to Parliament to trigger those clauses if we need to protect the unfettered access of Northern Ireland to Great Britain. Okay. That is already, by the way, respected in the withdrawal agreement. So this has precedent internationally. And I think it would be wrong and unfair to extrapolate that to breaking the rule of six or to breaking any other rules in our country. So that is all I would say to you, Zainab and Nathan.
Peter.
Yeah, I don't condone the breaking of international law, though states do it quite often. I think a really dangerous thing in the future, being a Brexiteer, is that future trade deals, say with the one with Japan, which is, I think is really impressive and I think it's great. In the future, will states be looking to make deals with us in the case of the worried we might renege on it or pull back? And I'm saying this as a Brexiteer. I just don't think it's great going forward that states might think, well, that they've sort of had an agreement here and they might pull back with us, and then that may sort of harm future relations worldwide. I don't know what everyone thinks about that, but I think it's quite an interesting view for the future.
But Peter, people can see that we are doing it in the extreme case that the interpretation.
You have, Nadhim, forgive me, you have said that. I just need to hear from the audience. You have said that repeatedly.
Beyond it, Japan agreed a deal with us because they see the benefits of a deal with the United Kingdom, which I think you were referring to earlier.
Katie.
So northern towns like Oldham are already disproportionately affected by coronavirus. And I think we're also going to be disproportionately affected by a no-deal Brexit. We were on holiday in Copenhagen last year and we were talking to people there and they said, look, we never have a majority government. Anytime anyone wants to form a government here, people need to sit down and they need to negotiate with each other. And they were absolutely flabbergasted that our UK government doesn't seem to understand what negotiation is. It's not standing there and shouting at the foreigners. You know, you need to sit round the table and negotiate properly. Otherwise, do you know who's going to lose? It's not going to be London. It's going to be northern towns like Oldham.
And Matt?
Yeah, sorry, I was. It was just to go back to the point of. Yes, it said it was oven ready, but Nadhim said that I's needed to be dotted and T's crossed, so it was never oven ready. Part of when the UK came out of the shared customs territory, it was always going to be that Northern Ireland was going to be different. It is part of the UK, but it is the only part of the UK with a land border. So we knew that this was going to happen. So it was just another example of the government spinning and basically just lying to us again.
Okay. There's more of you got your hands up and I'd love to come to you, but I'm afraid our time is up. Thank you, all our questioners from the Oldham area tonight. It was great to hear from you. Next week we'll have a virtual audience again, of course, and we will be coming from Chingford, in and around Chingford. And on the panel we'll be joined by comedian Shapi Khorsandi and the newly elected leader of the Liberal Democrats. So do get in touch with us if you'd like to be part of our virtual audience. We'd love to hear from you. You're a key part of the programme, so do get in touch. And you can do that at the Question Time website. There's an online form and you can fill it in. And then Adrian Charles, as always, is coming up on Radio 5 Live with Question Time Extra Time and his guests. Your chance to continue this conversation, have your say. You can see on the screen how to get in touch by phone, by text or by tweet. But for now, thank you very much to my panel for coming in our first show after summer. Great to get started. Thank you all very much for coming on. And Nicci, of course, joining us. You're joining us from Suffolk, I think, aren't you? So thank you for joining us down the line. And, of course, thank you to you at home for watching. From Question Time, bye-bye.